Earlier this week, videos of pensioners who collapsed while waiting forensic audit of the Osun State government's workforce drew widespread condemnation. Osun State has backtracked, saying sick pensioners can do the screening over the phone, but it's raised questions about the plight and treatment of Nigeria's oldest retired workers. Well, we're joined now by a pensioner and a former director of the Federal Civil Service, Chike Ogbechie. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight tonight. Well, I wish we could actually play that, particular report so it refreshes your mind about, what pensioners go through. But as a pensioner yourself, a retired director of the Federal Civil Service, and of course, a public sector consultant, how would you describe the state of the average pensioner in Nigeria today?
Thank you for having me speak on this very important subject. I think it's right I start with the background to public sector pension in particular. You remember that sometime during the regime of President Obasanjo, there was a lot of scandal regarding pensions, especially at the federal level, because what we had then was what we call direct defined benefit scheme. We now call it the old pension scheme. That is a system, the traditional system, where government budgeted for pension as with other lines of expenditure. And the government at that time began to notice that even from the experience of other countries, that continue to fund pension seemingly will be a challenge, because the pension takes a handsome part of government expenditure. So they decided to come up. Apart from that, the system as we had it then was fraught with maladministration and corruption. All of us knew what happened then. So government decided to solve the problem by introducing the contributory pension scheme, right, where the employer will contribute a fraction of the remuneration of the worker, and the worker also contributes, and it is invested by the pension fund administrators which are authorized to do so. So that by the time the pensioner is leaving office, he has his pension is paid from that fund, right, for life. That is the expectation. Now, what the situation is now is that, I should say that led to the Pension Reform Act of 2004, which was, you could call it a revolutionary or reform initiative, where it was all federal public service establishment, all public federal government employees were mandated to be placed on the contributory pension scheme, as well as, very importantly, the private sector. So what it means is that by that law, which was reenacted in 2014 as Pension Reform Act 2014, every employer of labor, even you in your home, if you have up to 3 servants, the law makes it mandatory you should enroll them on contributory pension scheme, so that when they become old and they leave their employment ceases, they have something to fall back on. So that has been a good system, but the way it is managed has been a serious problem, because we have issues. First of all, let me also mention that that law, the Pension Reform Act, was made to apply to federal public service as well as the private sector. The states were left to adopt it if they decide to buy in. And a number of states have made laws to establish a contributory pension scheme. So for the old pension scheme, there is a system for managing it. The essence is that by the time the last pensioner dies, the last pensioner on that scheme dies, the system will fold up. And that is being managed by pension, what they call it PTAD. That is Pension Transitional Arrangement Directorate. And I will tell you that that the system, that new system is working quite well, even though there are still some problems. For example, I have an aunt who retired as a teacher many years ago. She's supposed to be on pension, but her pension stopped sometime in 2012, and up till now, there's a challenge as to re-enrolling her.
So the challenge, sorry to cut you here, because quickly here, the challenge, like for instance, what we saw there on the day in Osun State, it left everyone, left a bitter pill and heart-wrenching. So how is it that people still must make themselves physically available, irrespective of their frail health?
For so-called verification.
Verification, yes. I think this is a testimonial to our poor management system. I think it is not fair to expect old people, some of them in their 90s, to come to a particular location from their place of residence for so-called verification. Whereas we have technological system that you could use for it. For example, Peter, that I'm telling you about, the one that manages the old scheme for the federal government, has introduced a system they call, it's based on this IT system, whereby they could communicate the pensioners at home through telephone to make inquiries as to whether they are still alive. Because the essence of this verification is to weed out those who have died. Because if you don't weed them out, it means that the pension will continue to run, and that is at cost to government. Right. So that is the essence. So I will advise those states to adopt more modern systems to relate with their pensioners to verify whether they are still alive. If you communicate them and through the system, they are not forthcoming, then you can assume that they are no longer there. But so that is that for the old pension scheme. Now, for the new pension scheme, that's the contributory pension scheme. Right. That's where I retired in 2016.
Okay. Have you been able to access it?
Yes, there are 2 or 3 issues in that regard.
What are those?
One is that at the federal level, I can speak authoritatively, even though in the states are even worse off. For example, my home state of Delta, those who retired 2017 are still not paid. They just leave no pension, no gratuity. But for the federal, it's fairly better, but it's still an issue. Because when you retire at the federal level, in the federal public service, now, what happens is that government does not fund the pension scheme, because there is an element of the contributory pension fund that is, they call it accrued benefit.
Okay, so unfortunately we don't have much time, but there's something I'd like to point out. Is there a nexus between, this treatment of pensioners in Nigeria and the level of corruption that you find in public service? Could this be the reason why people tend to want to, secure their future, dip their hands into the public till, to protect their future?
Yeah.
Is there one?
Yes, that tendency is real and it's understandable. I don't condone corruption. But where you see that your colleagues who retire go through excruciating pain in their life because of non-regular payment, you are tempted to help yourself while you're in service. I was going on to the contributory pension scheme. One of these principal problems is that federal public servants, when they retire, they are not paid their pension for up to a year or more. Why? Because government has not funded the scheme. Because there's an element of the contributory pension which is called accrued rights. That is those who were in service before the contributory pension came into force. So for them, it is assumed that they retired as at 2004 when the scheme started. And so their entitlement, assuming that they retired at that time, is computed and kept aside. When they retire, government is supposed to release it so that it will match with their contributed fund in order to pay them. Government does not give priority to funding that accrued pension.
Till date?
Yes. So people retire, and for over a year, when I retired, for example, it was 15 months, I was suffering. So that is one. Another issue regarding is that there is provision in the Constitution that pensions in the federal public service shall be reviewed once every 5 years or anytime there's civil service salary review. Now, federal government does that discriminatingly. They review the one of the old pension scheme, but the ones of the contributory pensioners, they just ignore it.
When was it last reviewed?
Well, government reviewed in 2007
Okay.
when salary was 2010, right. And recently following the minimum wage. But they do that for the old pensioners, the
Not
old
for
scheme. They neglect the contributory pensioners. That is the predicament we're facing now. That means that whatever
What transgenders, I don't mean to shut you out. What transgenders is something that the entire nation is, interested in. So I would like to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.